I'd be happy to speculate a little bit about why there's such a disconnect between biblical scholars and lay folks. I think there are problems on both sides of this equation. Amongst biblical scholars, there's not a lot of desire to communicate with a lay level audience. It's not a very prestigious thing to do. It doesn't really help advance your career. And it can be frustrating to try and explain sort of basic concepts to a disinterested or hostile audience. Even amongst those who happen to have a desire for it, you don't necessarily have the ability. The ability to communicate with a scholarly audience isn't the same skill set as the ability to communicate with a lay level audience. So even if you wanted to, you might not necessarily be able to in a way that's compelling or attractive or that's going to hold people's attention for very long. And even amongst the people who have both the desire and the ability to do so, the biblical scholars tend to be very specialized in a particular area. And so even if they are communicating effectively with a lay level audience, the lay level audience is not getting the breadth of what biblical scholarship has to offer. For example, I think Bart Ehrman has been pretty successful in communicating some of his ideas to a lay level audience, but all he basically does is historical critical studies of the New Testament, which is nice, but that's a very small percentage in terms of what all of biblical studies is about, especially today. There's an entirely different set of problems on the lay level side of the equation. Christian churches in general haven't done a very good job of cultivating a cultural expectation of continued adult education. So churches will invest a lot in elementary level education, middle school level education, high school level education. But as soon as kids go off to college, that's basically it. There's no programs put in place to continue to develop the intellectual aspects of their religious belief. Churches will occasionally attempt to do adult education things, bring in speakers or have book clubs or do devotional Bible studies, but none of these things really have the consistency necessary to develop an intellectual capacity and engagement with the academic world over time. Apart from a lack of a cultural expectation, there are still plenty of places in the church, especially on the more conservative sides of things, that are just imminently anti-intellectual and are just hostile outright to the idea of biblical or theological expertise in any form. And unfortunately, you just can't reason people out of anti-intellectualism because reason is the very thing that they are opposed to. I think there's also a lot of fear in churches and in church leadership in particular that if lay people get access to scholarly resources, that they will abandon their faith. I think this ends up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy because the more intellectually isolated a person is, the more brittle their worldview is, and the more likely their worldview is to fall apart upon contact with somebody with a different point of view. Keeping people away from alternative viewpoints is the best way to make sure that they can't fruitfully interact with people with differing viewpoints and they can't adapt to encounters with people with differing viewpoints. So when it comes to this disconnect between scholars and lay people, I think there's both a lack of supply and a lack of demand. Nevertheless, I'm optimistic. That's part of the reason that I'm here. I think that we have enough overqualified and underemployed people with PhDs and access to social media that we might be able to turn this in the right direction by having more lay level engagement with scholarly ideas. At least that's my hope. So we'll see.